So let's get right to it. All right, good evening and welcome back to session 4 of Who Are the People in Your Talmudic Neighborhood. Again, I just want to thank the Beth Am and the Thuman Beit Midrash for having me back, as well as thanks to all of you for being here.
Thank you for teaching.
Okay, and it's reciprocated as well. So thank you for teaching me too, because I know I've had a lot of opportunity, a lot of fun. I would say putting this together and going through and learning about some of these sages, as well as the lessons we can learn from them. And the lessons I get to learn from you guys as well. So tonight is actually, we're doing a throwback, I guess is the words that the kids use nowadays. A throwback to our second session where we had Rabban Gamliel, the leader, and there was that big upheaval in the Beit Midrash, and it all started from one question asked by a student. At the end of the final story in the discussion, that student is identified as Shimon Bar Yochai, also known as Rashbi. And I think it's fascinating whenever the Talmud has like a punchline like that doesn't really fit with the rest of the story, but then they throw that conclusion in. It is generally shouting at us to pay attention to me. There's something here. So I thought to conclude tonight, or to conclude the series, it might be a neat opportunity to actually look at Rashbi a little bit. And this is the guy who ultimately ends up on Lag BaOmer. It ends up being his yortzeit, I guess, but people celebrate in a very weird way by like setting bonfires everywhere and going to a cave in Meron and singing songs all night, and all sorts of mystical, fun pieces about him. So I thought he'd be a great guy to end with, and we'll see if we can tie his lessons in back to the beginning a little bit and over the course of what we've done the last 3 weeks. So we're going to start with the Jerusalem Talmud, actually, tonight. This is the lesser used, or possibly even lesser known, of the two Talmuds. Ironically, the one that we have preserved more is the one from Babylon when we were in exile, the one that was passed around in Palestine at that time. Is a very different format. It's not as discussion based. It's more like cut and dry, like sentence, and you have to sort of discern by reading throughout what they're actually referring to. So oftentimes it'll be read in conjunction with the Babylonian Talmud, or possibly as like a cross-reference. But for tonight, our source is actually going to start from there, because they end up quoting him directly, and some of these quotes are just fantastic. So we got to start there. So Jeff, you want to start us off?
Sure. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai said, "Had I stood at Mount Sinai at the time when the Torah was given to Israel, I would have asked the Holy One that he create 2 mouths in a man, one to be occupied with Torah, the other to serve all his other needs." Then, retracting his words, Rabbi Shimon said, "If, when man has only one mouth, the world can barely endure all the informing it does, how much less if he had 2?
He's talking about Lashon Hara?
Lashon Hara, just any form of like treachery or just wanton speech or improper speech, right? Yes. But in Hebrew, if you see there, Yachol La'amod mi Lashon Hara shelo, right, it's unclear what he means specifically by Lashon Hara, but clearly there's some form of Lashon Hara, yes.
So is he saying that he would be tempted to, issue forth Lashon Hara?
Interesting, right? You're looking at his comment, it seems he doesn't seem to be talking about himself, but rather he's talking about the masses, right? Had I stood at Mount Sinai when the time when Torah was given to Israel, I would have asked the Holy One to give 2 mouths to everybody. One mouth specifically would be dedicated and devoted to Torah study. Right? So already we're getting a sense of what's actually important to him. But then what do you do with that other mouth? That's for everything else. Right? But we got to have one specifically dedicated and focused to Torah. Right? And then he thought for a second and he said, actually, hold on. Because everybody already has one mouth, and what should that mouth be used for? Torah, right? Exclusively. And with that one mouth that we currently have that should exclusively be used for Torah, people are already spreading gossip and slander and all of these improper speeches. How much more would it be if everybody had 2 mouths? Right? So you're starting to get a sense of how he views himself, how he views his primary occupation, and how he views others around him. Right? So far?
He also says the world can barely endure it. So what he's talking about is the destruction of the world. That Lashon Hara is going to destroy the world.
Certainly, there's a piece of that as well. Absolutely. So should we push a little bit farther before we start to make his character traits a little explicit? Let's look at source 2. Paul, you want to do it?
Hezekiah stated in the name of Rabbi Jeremiah, who said it in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. I have seen the sons of heaven who inherit the next world, and they are few. If they are 1,000, I and my son are among them. If 100, I and my son are among them. And if only 2, I and my son are among them.
Try again.
Are them.
If it's only 2 who get to go on to this next world.
Well, that's fairly...
Right?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Right? So you're calling it arrogant. Right? And it certainly can be read that way.
And if you go back to the first one, that's what struck me in the first
Go ahead.
paragraph, actually.
Yeah, good.
Is that if he stood at Mount Sinai, like Moses didn't do enough, and it was like, but if it was him, he would have had a better plan, kind of thing. His first thought,
Absolutely.
it was like, and that was the first thing that struck, but I didn't say anything but that was the first thought I had. It's like, who are you that you're
would
going to
know,
reproach Moses, or you're going to know better than Moshe?
Well, but go one step further. It's what would he have done at the time when Torah was given? Who would he have spoken to?
He would have asked.
He would have specifically had this direct line, right? Moses is the one who is only whoever gets to see God face to face, or as they say, right, face to back, according to the Midrash. But Rashbi says, if I were there, I would have specifically asked God, and the impression that we can read from this is, how would God have responded?
He would have
probably would have granted it, right? Seems to be that Rashbi has this sort of super close connection, right? And then if you look in the next one, Rashbi starts by saying, I have seen who is going to inherit the next world to come, right? So he's got this mystical glimpse already where he's living, it seems to be, on another plane that the rest of mankind aren't.
Who's the guy that was buried with his son in up to their necks?
That's this guy.
That's this guy.
Yeah, we're going to get to that one.
Right. So, isn't it the case that he actually wasn't doing things right?
Well, we have to get to that. Right. That's our third page, 4C.
It's a statement of non-humility, if you want to put it that way.
Well, here's the thing.
Don't you think? If there were only two, then it would have been him and his son.
Is it non-humility or arrogance, or is it just reality? Right, at a certain point, for example, I could say I have a good sense of humor and still be humble about it. Right, so I'm allowed to be self-aware.
Oh my God.
I didn't say anything yet. That was funny.
No, I just finished.
You're just catching up. Okay, great. So I mean, there's a certain sense that the Talmud allows the sages to be self-aware without encroaching upon humility.
Okay.
This is very strong language to not at least see, but maybe there's a little bit of arrogance there. The question is it founded? Right? Is it justified arrogance? Meaning, is he actually able to live on that level that he could justify saying those types of things? It still may be arrogant, but maybe it's still true.
Okay.
So that's our question.
But
Then
it's
we
not
have to
just
figure
arrogance.
out.
It's like being able to. You are the judge, as if you can judge all these other people at a level, like God.
He is.
Almost.
He thinks himself like that.
A little bit, right?
Yeah, because he can make those determinations.
But it's not he says I know, it's I have seen, right? So he got some sort of glimpse into this heavenly other world.
Say that.
Right? Anybody could say it, but he actually does.
So he gives his son a pass automatic.
Oh, and his son is the other one who gets to go with him. Interesting, right? So not his student,
Not his wife.
right? Not his wife, not his teacher, right? By the way, he was a student of anybody know? Rabbi Akiva.
Oh.
Right? So he very often would teach in the way that learning from him was like learning directly from Rabbi Akiva.
So what was Rabbi Akiva's assignment for him? Didn't Rabbi Akiva assign one job for 5? After his 25,000 students were killed.
Yeah.
Then he started again, but he only took in 5 students, and he gave each one a job.
Right. So
what was his job?
I don't know about his job exactly. I do know there's a story about when Rabbi Akiva has to determine like who's going to be his number one. He doesn't decide. He picks a number one and a number two. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, and the other one was Rabbi Meir, actually our guy from
last week.
Or the husband of the guy
Yeah.
of the lady from last week. And let's see if I remember the story correctly. He says Rabbi Meir gets to sit in the first chair. Rashbi's face like turns pale, and then Akiva says to him, Shimon, let it be known enough that I know and that God knows what you're actually capable of. Kind of like, stay the number two guy. I don't want to get you. I don't want to promote you to this leadership position because I'm afraid of what you'll do, type of thing. I don't know what job he actually had, but I do know that story. So I don't know if that helps at all to sort of frame the way Akiva viewed him. He viewed him as very special, but he said, "Let it be enough that just God and I know who you actually are." Which is interesting because, well, we'll get to that actually in a little bit. But what we're going to start to notice is not only does Shimon bar Yochai put himself in this sort of separate place, right, where if everybody else is on the world, it's just me and my son going on to the next world. We'll start to see how the other rabbis respond to him and sort of what place did they put him in. Which is interesting. So let's get to it, right? By the way, I just want to give one note.
Conversation strange.
Which one?
I mean, about who's going to the next.
Well, absolutely. It's
mean,
not something that most people would talk about.
In Jewish text, I mean, it's certainly not uncommon in Christian text because everybody's always talking about who's going where. But, I mean.
Well, I think it highlights what Rashbi is focused on, right? He is definitely paying attention to this other world, sort of the eternal world, as it were, whereas a lot of other rabbinic teachings tend to focus on the temporal, right? What's going on right now? Yes, sir.
Is there anything we're missing in this story? Some context about where he was when he saw the sons of heaven, or by what means he saw the sons of heaven?
It comes in the context of. It's not even he's in the room. It's like a series of 7 or 8 different statements that were all said by people talking about just stuff like this. I don't think there's even surrounding anything because there's just before it is another statement from Chizkiah also quoting about Shimon bar Yochai. And before that was like Rabbi Akiva was quoted as saying something, and before that Rabbi Akiva was quoted. And so like there's just a bunch of lists of ma'amarim, like statements that people made. I don't know if there's a larger context to it.
And that statement implies
that
he's seen
the next world.
All of them.
That's right.
Everybody past and future who's going to be inheriting the next world. Well, yeah.
He says there aren't many.
Right. Because because he knows him and his son are going to be among them.
Right. Right.
So that's
and what I'm always so full disclosure, what I always struggle with about this one is he's seen the B'nai Aliyah, right? These who are going to inherit the next world, and then he says, if there's 1,000, my son and I are among them. If there's 100, my son and I are among them. If it's only 2, like, haven't you just seen who they were?
Yeah.
Right. So that's what I'm not 100% sure. I just don't know what to do with that line, because why not say like, and there were only 2 and it's my son and I.
Right.
Maybe that would be the arrogant. Maybe this is like his way of showing humility is like, maybe it's 1,000, whereas he knows the answer is there's only 2, but he sort of takes us through that step so that others can feel helpful. I don't know. I just that's as close as I can come up with to anything. But I do want to just clarify that in the different texts, depending on which one I translated from, he goes back and forth between Shimon ben Yochai, Shimon bar Yochai. Ben and bar are the same word. It's just one is a more Hebrew text and one is a more Aramaic text. Or perhaps I started pasting in the translation from an older source or a newer source, doesn't matter. So it's the same guy. These next 3, I actually had difficulty finding them in Hebrew. I took them from Benny Lau's book. Rabbi Lau has a book called The Sages, which I kind of wish I would have read before I gave the class. I only picked it up this week because it looked really neat. And so some of these actually were helpful, and so I wanted to attribute that as well. The truth is, none of what I had is actually mine, right? Everything I take from other classes I've learned, and then I just sort of piece it together for this purpose. But this one in particular, I wanted to give source, because otherwise I prefer to have the texts in Hebrew alongside, even if we don't read them. Just I think it adds a certain authenticity or maybe validity to them. But these are real sources, and so let's go through these three, and then we'll try to finish our picture of Shimon Bar Yochai. Bob, you ready?
Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, those like us who are constantly engaged in the study of Torah do not interrupt it even for the recitation of the Shema.
Okay, so what do we have now? Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, what does he do with his entire day?
He just studies Torah.
Studies Torah.
He's not even interrupted. He doesn't even interrupt it to
say the Shema. Right?
What does it mean to say in somebody else's name?
Rabbi Yochanan, who is a much, much later Amora, is quoting Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai as having said this.
Okay.
What's fascinating is, as we're going through, anytime we have somebody quoting Shimon Bar Yochai, it's not one of his students. I was fascinated by this, that he tends to be quoted by Amoraim, people who came 3 to 4 centuries later. But nobody around his time is quoting or having dialogue with him. Very rarely. Maybe you get Yehoshua ben Levi in a couple cases. Rabbi Meir you see because of their direct relationship as both being students of Rabbi Akiva. But beyond that, you don't have a list really of any of his students talking, like very, very rarely. Any teachings that we have came from later sources, and even Shimon Bar Yochai was living in Israel, right, in Usha, but then all of the stuff we're getting is from the Babylonians, who are, or like Yochanan was an Amora in Israel, but still he's like the 400s, whereas Shimon would be the 200s. So we're talking a couple hundred years later before he starts to resurface.
So this is kind of raw. Like, what do you do when it's time to recite Shema? And Shema is like in the first page of the Talmud.
That's right.
So what do you do when it's time? How does he get by? How does he get off? Not making time for the Shema.
Well, what is Shema? Just generally describing it.
A statement of fealty and acceptance of the oneness of God.
Okay, so there are 2 possible ways of looking at it. Number 1 is accepting the yoke of heaven, declaring God's unity, right? This declaration of faith, or accepting the yoke of heaven is often how it's described. And then the other piece is that reading Shema is a form of Torah study, because you're reading actual verses from the Torah. Well, if you're engaged in one mitzvah, you're exempt from another. And Rashbi says, the way I study Torah, I accept the yoke of heaven while I'm studying Torah. So I'm not going to break that to say the Shema, which is this other way of doing the exact same thing. Because in the time that I would break, I've already, that second to pause here and then say the Shema is time that I missed potentially studying.
That's what Rabbi Meir said. He made his own rules. So who's the guy they had this?
Rabbi Gamliel.
Gamliel, right.
Yes.
He had a servant.
He did. And I was actually wondering if there might be some links that come up a little bit. The only difference is Gamliel was setting examples for the public and living his own way. But he was justified by saying, well, he's my guy, he's different. And we had that phrase, right? I'm not like any other person. Here we have, very similarly, Shimon Bar Yochai saying things that are going to separate him, and he could have just as easily said, I'm not like any other person. But what's interesting is, Gamliel did it from a position of power. Shimon Bar Yochai is just a lone wolf. Right? That's the only sort of distinction we need to make at this point. Because Shimon Bar Yochai is not the head of the academy. He's not a number 2. I mean, he's just a guy who learns a lot. He was number 2, I guess, of Rabbi Akiva's students, right? But even then, Rabbi Akiva didn't take over the Beit Midrash. He was still like pretty far down the line. So he's saying this from a position of non-power. But I think that's what makes Rashbi so interesting, or so exciting at this point. You know what, Bob? You want to do one more for us?
Rabbi Shimon
short?
Bar Yochai says, an unlearned person, even if he is pious or holy or upright, is cursed unto God.
And again, now we're seeing Rashbi's major focus is one thing and one thing only, which is Torah study.
There goes
right?
Hasidut.
What's that?
There goes Hasidut right there.
Perhaps. Where we're now the difference between Rashbi and Rabban Gamliel is Rabban Gamliel still interacted with many other people, right? He still he would go to Rome and he had to interact with the Caesar there, and he had worldly affairs to conduct. Rashbi doesn't. We never have any account. I actually looked this up before I say never because I like to be sure. I could not find a single instance of Rashbi having any other profession or trade. If you remember the story between Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yehoshua, Rabbi Yehoshua was a pecham, a charcoal maker. Right? He had another trade. The other one, we heard about these two other scholars that were on the land, and one of them, right, they didn't have any other work because they were so poor. But many scholars would have either another job that they would work at to make money, or that they would have some other sort of interest, like studying the stars or the weather patterns, something else besides just exclusively Torah study. Rashbi seems to isolate himself and say there is Torah study, and that is our primary occupation, so much so at the exclusion of everything else. Yes, please.
A kind of unusual thing since he was a student of Akiva.
Yeah.
And he, unless I'm mixed up, was not a really learned person, or he
became very learned.
In late in life. But,
yes.
He's sort of. Is this Rashbi, the Shimon ben Bar Yochai?
Mm-hmm.
Because he said that night. Okay,
oh yeah,
so
just the acronym of his name.
He's sort of assuming that you're supposed to be learning all your life, and so here his teacher didn't learn all his life.
I don't think anybody would call Akiva unlearned.
Right, I don't mean that, but that there was a time when he was, and
okay,
and this.
So you could be cursed unto God, but you can do something about it.
Right.
That's okay.
Okay.
He's not. It's not a fatalist approach, right? It's not that you're determined to be cursed by God. Right. It's if you're not learned, you are an abomination.
That was just his opinion?
That's his opinion.
So he didn't derive it from anything?
No.
Just strictly his opinion?
Yep.
Okay.
In fact, there's a story, this one I saw in Rabbi Lau's book, that Rashbi went to go visit somebody who was sick, and he said to the guy started spouting off unkind words, and Rashbi said, well, maybe this is why you're not feeling well. And then the man said, well, should my disease be afflicted unto you? And Rashbi said, oh, thank you for that, right? Because he viewed this visiting the sick as a break from Torah study, right? Like he couldn't even see doing a mitzvah, right? Something that as tantamount as so crucial and essential to our religion as visiting the sick, which is one of those things that in the Siddur it says it's right. Is that one of the lists that says that there's no fixed measure, but the reward comes in the Chalak L'Olam? I think so. Elu Dvarim. Yes, it is. I don't know if it is in the list. I think it is. I think visiting the sick is one of those things that like we get the reward for it only in the world to come. It's like one of those like great whatevers. But Rashbi viewed it as a break from his Torah study. So he was thankful that the guy gave him the disease, because he felt like he earned that by breaking from Torah study. I mean, like, this is we're talking extremist.
He felt like he needed the punishment.
He needed the punishment, right? So he took the guy's disease away, right, and said, "Thank you for that, because I broke from my Torah study to visit you here while you're sick."
So he felt in an ideal world, everybody would be doing Torah study all the time.
I don't know if he thinks that everybody should be doing Torah study all the time.
Everybody else is cursed.
Men.
So right. So if you're not studying Torah, right. you're cursed unto God, meaning like you're not doing the right thing in this world. It seems to be. At least at this stage of his life. We'll see if that might change as time goes on. But it certainly seems to be, I mean, look, we got to have just one mouth exclusively for Torah study, right? But then he sort of recants a little bit and realizes, you know what, maybe not everybody can think like this or can act like this. So, Kathy, you want to do the Sifrei one about Pesach and Sukkot?
And Sukkot, which do not fall during work seasons, are 7 and 8 days respectively. Shavuot, which does fall during a work season, is only 1 day, showing that the Torah is considerate of Israel's welfare.
Okay, right. So he's talking about Israeli calendar, right? They don't have the 8 days or the 9 days like we do, or the 2 days for Shavuot. But it's so fascinating that the reason that he gives for why the holidays are what they are is because Pesach and Sukkot are not during the work season, they're during vacation time. So it's easy for people to come for a whole week. But Shavuot is right in the middle of the work season, right? It's like just the peak of harvest time, so you need to be harvesting. So come for the day and then go. And the reason is it shows that Torah is considerate of Israel's welfare. Meaning Torah doesn't really say that we have to stop work during the work season, stop work during vacation time, right? During the... I just think it's fantastic, but right, like he sort of like recognizes that I'm in this special place, but nobody else is. So I'm going to make laws for them that they'll be able to live by, right? And so when he starts to talk about the common person, right? How would you guys describe? I put the question at the bottom just to get us thinking.
I have
but
a question about that, though.
Yeah, wonderful.
Passover, wouldn't they be sowing the grain? Well, maybe it's a little late.
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Sowing, I mean, when do they put the seeds down?
Way
before.
Planted before, because already you're harvesting the Omer.
Yeah.
Right from the start of Pesach.
Okay, so I know it's so different in climate than
here. Right. I'm also not an agricultural
specialist.
No, like I know that there are some really neat studies done about the different holidays and how each one falls at a different time of year and stuff, but I didn't get into it as much that way. I don't know. I like the people more than the grain. Right, so it's funny that we're starting to see him distinguish that these common people have to do their things. Probably he wouldn't even break from Torah, right? He probably would continue studying during these times. Like I don't know that he would necessarily observe all the mitzvot in the way that they need to be observed, right? If he's not even breaking for Shema. But I just don't know. Yeah.
So how does he feel is his purpose in this world at all?
Oh, beautiful. At this point, we don't know. But we can sort of see this straddling a little bit of this world and the next world, where he sort of lives in this, 1 foot here and 1 foot there type of place.
It's like I'm in the 4th grade and I really should be double promoted to,
to high school or something, right? I mean, yeah.
What am I doing stuck here?
Right. Maybe there is a piece of that. And actually, these next 2 sources, which I'm going to let you guys study on your own first before we come back for the concluding story, are going to highlight those pieces a little bit, and we'll actually talk about, Rashbi. Okay?
Wait, stop there.
So he's saying Jews. It's not just him, it's Jews.
Other when Israel does their work is done by others. Oh my, as it says.
What do you think these goyim are there for,
Well, and he's got a biblical verse to prove it, too. Right? And strangers will feed your...
I don't know if it's that. It just says, I think what he means is that...
I think that's exactly what he means.
I think it's just that we're, in his opinion, we're supposed to study Torah, and there are other people that don't have the commandment to study Torah, and they'll keep the world going.
We're a bunch of trust fund babies.
No, it's just different roles and different...
It doesn't have to be when everybody from Israel does this. It's when people from Israel do this, right? When Israelites do this, then their work is done for them. So either trust fund babies or you get a lot, or handouts, right? That'd be the other.
Well, that's like bringing in Arabs to do work on kibbutz. With the chalutzim, it was a big argument.
Or
Well, there was
bringing
that.
in
Or even like people in the
Thai
kollel,
and
right? Imagine like
Vietnamese.
the other extreme. People who go and learn all day, so someone has to do the work for them, right? But they just get government handouts a little bit to be able to sustain themselves, and their actual work gets done by others. So it could be either way, but either side, we're definitely painting ourselves an extreme.
Let's see how this develops. And when Israel does not perform the will of the omnipresent, their work is done by themselves, as it is said, and you shall gather in your grain. So what he's saying is, when you don't, here's what work is. It's punishment for you not doing your studying Talmud.
As opposed to what Rabbi Ishmael said, which was, this is the proof for how we know we're supposed to have a worldly occupation.
Yeah.
Israel does not perform the will. Their work is done by themselves. Okay.
Okay, so, and not only that, is that where we are?
Mhm.
Yeah.
But the work of others is also done by them, as it is said, and you shall serve your enemy. Abaye said, many have followed the advice of Rabbi Ishmael and succeeded. Others have followed Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and did not succeed.
Let's see why.
So we brought in Abaye. Why do we, where's he from? Where's he
Abaye
come from?
is a Babylonian Amora, 4th century. He's partners with Rava. Again, notice that the one quoting Rashbi is an Amora,
What's a more?
Later.
like 400, 500s.
Yeah, Morim.
Well, you said you wanted to know some stories about Amoraim, so we got them quoting Rashbi instead.
Say that again?
So what do you guys do with this first source here?
I'm all right. It's a later, student of Talmud who offered opinions, but they're after.
So in general, Kathy, just the one sentence summary is the Tanaim spoke in the Mishnah, and they lived roughly 0 to 200. And then Amoraim are the Gemara speakers, and they're 200 to 550-ish.
Okay.
So your question, what do we...
Yeah, what do you do with this? I mean,
Well,
It's-
you got two different sources from the Torah. I mean, that you can. One uses one argument, and one is using the other argument.
absolutely.
But the Gemara judges against Rashbi.
Against Rashbi. But what did Rashbi say? What are we supposed to be doing with our time?
Study Torah.
Study Torah.
That's
Wouldn't you think that's the ideal that the Gemara would want to impress upon us?
But to the exclusion of everything else.
Okay, so that's why we accept Rabbi Ishmael, right? And notice Abaye doesn't say this one is right and this one is wrong. He just gives us data. And what's the data?
Some went this way, some went that.
Some went this way, some went that way.
If the
But
ones
even
who
one
went
step
this way
further,
did okay, but the ones who went that way loused up.
the ones who balanced Torah with a worldly occupation succeeded. Right? What does success mean? We don't know
Right.
what that means, did succeed. But it seems to be they have a good life path.
Does Rashbi have any alliances? Does anybody in Talmud agree with him? Or does he stand alone?
He often stands alone. There may be a couple of cases where people agree with him. I know people certainly quote him. I mean, we've had that here.
So I would imagine that these great rabbis must think that, in a sense, he's putting them down. He's
Well, all these great rabbis that had other occupations
Right.
were not following his path.
Right.
and he's saying that they're lesser.
Right. What's fascinating also is that he has a reputation, a lot of discussions about Shabbat, where the Mishnah will say one thing, and Rabbi Shimon will come in, this is Shimon Bar Yochai, will come in and give a much, much more lenient approach. Well, you know what? Let's read the second source. Go ahead, go through the second source, and we'll see how the rabbis viewed him from a halachic standpoint now. Because remember, before, this is just a principle, it's just an ideal, right? How should our life be? Number 5 is going to talk about actually how he's viewed halachically. The background is that there was some discussion on the kashrut of an animal with a pierced windpipe. one opinion says it has to be the puncture has to be this way, and Rashbi says if it just punctured like this, then it could still be kosher, whatever. So I didn't want to get into all that, and the truth is it doesn't matter so much because the exciting part is what I've printed here for you.
Okay.
Jeff, you want to hit it? Oh, okay,
No,
Kathy.
okay.
I, Rav Zera, Rav Hiya Bar Abba, and Rav Asi happened to be in the town where Rav Maluk lived, and asked him, "Did the master say that the halacha was in accordance with Rabbi Shimon?"
Okay, I want to pause real quick. Rabbi Zeira and Rabbi Chia Bar Abba and Rav Asi were a group of scholars who were known as Nechote. They would travel from Israel to Babylon, and that was sort of their job, was to say, hey, here's what they said in the other parts, and then here's what they said in the other parts. So very often when you hear Rabbi Zeira quoting something, or Rav Asi especially, and Rabbi Chia Bar Abba, I'm just not as familiar with him, but when they are talking, very often they'll be the center of the conversation is, well, what did they say in the other land? And this is what we said here, or this is what they said here. So when he says that we happened to be in the town where Rav Maluk lived and asked him, did Rav Maluk say that the halacha was in accordance with Rabbi Shimon? And now we have the dialogue. So go ahead, Kathy.
And he replied, "I said that the halacha was not in accordance with Rabbi Shimon." Rav Zera then said to Rav Bibi, "And what tradition have you got in the matter?" He replied, "Thus said Rav Isaac ben Ami, on the authority of Rav Joshua ben Levi, the halacha is in accordance with the view of Rav Shimon."
So now we have a disagreement. Rabbi Zera says, we heard from this guy that you don't follow Rabbi Shimon. Rav Bibi says, this is not Netanyahu, right? But either way, you don't trust him, right? Right? And he says, we said the halacha is in accordance with Rabbi Shimon. And that seems to be the authoritative stance. But in the end, now the Talmud comes in and says the halacha, however... Go ahead, Kathy.
Is not in accordance with the view of Rav Shimon.
Right. And that's the whole story.
So with the same
Too
conclusion.
many
then.
people.
Same
in here.
conclusion, right?
For me.
That it's not. Do you want to act it out real quick just to see? we can put water bottles here, right? So here's Rav Maluk, and he says
He's the
halacha
master.
is not sorry.
The halacha
Yeah.
is not in accordance
He said it
with Rav
wasn't,
Shimon.
right? So here come Rabbi Zera, and he says, "Wait, did you say that the halacha was according to Rabbi Shimon?" And he says, "No."
Right.
Then Rabbi Zera continues, and he says, "Hey, guess what I heard? The halacha is not according to him." And he says, "Well, that's not what I heard. I heard the halacha is according to him." End of the story. And the Talmud comes in and says, just to be sure, it's not.
It's not.
Right?
Okay.
And in fact, in many cases, it's not according to Rabbi Shimon, which is so fascinating that we have him printed so many times, and he's even in the Mishnah, right? That we don't have to wait for the Gemara to get his opinions. He's oftentimes included as that second opinion, especially, like I said, a lot of the stuff in relation to Shabbat, where Rabbi Shimon is this opinion that is always included and never followed. And I wonder if we looked at this
It's sort
first
of
one,
like,
yeah,
Hillel and Shammai.
yeah.
kind of like
He's
Hillel and
always
Shammai,
brought into it, but it's
except
never
why is
his-
Shammai always excluded? Or what's the other, unless you took this class last year and you talked about Shammai as being the preservationist and Hillel being the innovator, as you've learned in third grade or whatever, the third grade level of understanding, right? That's
It
a
was
terrible way of
his last
saying
year
it.
for me.
Fine, but
Sure.
well, so we've got a true Rabbi Akiva in the class. Then this is great. Whatever. I mean, like that initial first wave of reading, right? We're always told that Hillel is the lenient one and Shammai is the strict one, right? What's fascinating in this case, though, is Rabbi Shimon, Rashbi, is almost always the lenient one, right? Which is actually fitting with his personality, right? Why would he be so lenient a ruler for all these people?
Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, because he
Yeah.
doesn't believe they are capable of even achieving any kind of.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course, because
they are what they are.
right, they've got this handicap of just being regular people.
Right, yeah.
Right? Like that's how unfortunate for them. Well, let's at least let them follow some laws. So I'll make some lenient standards here. And there was like, and the rabbis say, Rashbi, no, we want to push the people to some sort of standard. And Rashbi says, what's the point? They're not going to get.
not gonna get there.
They're not going to get there. They're not going to be able to learn Torah. So why bother? Just let them feel good about themselves, And sort of,
In this world. because-
Right.
Yeah.
let them feel good. Let them enjoy and think, hey, they're doing mitzvot. Yay. They're not going to get to what's reality. They're not going to have the yoke of heaven from Torah study the way it needs to be done. Right. But the rabbis reject that opinion. They say no.
And Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai probably feels the same way about the rabbis that reject him.
In what sense?
Well, that they're not capable of understanding his
Maybe.
his take on it.
Maybe.
They're not as elevated as he is. So
What we should
because if they were, they'd agree with him.
perhaps.
Right.
I don't know. Did you guys notice where Rabbi Shimon is sharing all of these statements? I know we said a lot of them are coming quoted from Amoras later, but do you notice that they don't seem to take place in the Beit Midrash? Like we don't have a record of
The town.
he's starting and teaching and something. It's like his teachings get passed along in spurts. Like where was he? We just don't know. But again, it's maybe he was like that much of an outsider that the rabbis were like, go learn your Torah, but don't bother us because we're actually living life here. And he says, but you're living this life. I'm living that life, the life to come. Like, don't you want to be on this plane, like with me? And no, they don't. Right? I mean, they say, well, Rashbi, you can do your ideal extremist vision here, but like, we're going to treat the people as adults that have to make decisions and have to balance multiple tensions all at the same time. And that's what Rabbinic Judaism is.
Yeah.
Right? They treat us like adults. They say you're going to have conflict. And your relationship with God is going to change. But guess what? Name a single relationship in your life that doesn't change. It doesn't happen. Or it gets boring and then you end it. Right? Like if it's, like we're constantly evolving and we're constantly changing and those around us are.
In a way, it's a critique on God's creation.
How so?
God created these people. God
Right.
created this world, and obviously He's one of the only few that can attain this level.
Okay.
Then God's creation is
Well, that's what he says in the first paragraph. He says, God, you didn't create these people correctly.
right. God's creation is obviously flawed.
Seems to be. And how does he know it? Because he got
he's-
to that level.
He's at that level.
Right? There certainly is something.
Yeah.
Like there's something going on with this guy. I don't know the right expression to say,
Yeah.
but it's like he's just going there, right? Right, and
Can you imagine the Tower of Babel if everybody had two mouths?
the Tower of Babel. I don't know.
Tower Wabble.
Too much.
It's like when my kids start talking in my house, we always hear double everything, right? Ba 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 ba.
And going back to what you said before,
Yeah.
he may have been sincere and authentic in his thought. I mean,
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I don't think he's putting on airs.
No,
I think he genuinely
right.
believes what he's
I'm
saying.
changing my feeling about him.
But it's striking to us that we would hear him like, who talks this way, right? Like there's a certain. But if you're on your own,
Yeah.
you don't have to have people skills.
Yeah.
When all you do is study Torah,
Yeah.
that's all. Like that's what you know.
Right.
Was on the spectrum.
There was some.
Autistic.
Oh, right.
This is one that I saw in Rabbi Lau's book. There was a guy who was known for giving nicknames to rabbis around this time, and or blessings to rabbis. And the blessing that he gave to Rashbi is he forgets very little. And Rashbi yells at him and says, "How dare you say that I forget a little? Like I don't forget anything. Like that's your compliment to me is I forget very little." He's like, "Go get out of here! Like I don't forget anything. I'm the genuine teacher of Rabbi Akiva's teachings, and I'm the one who balances this other world that I get to live in, that I get to visit, right?" And it's this
Wow.
right. I mean, he's really, like we said, maybe 1 foot. Sort of like on his tiptoes in this world and a full foot planted in God's world. And what's where that's really going to come to light, actually, is on our last story here, where we get to see Rabbi Shimon, one case, actually interacting with some other rabbis. Still not in the Beit Midrash, mind you, right? They're outside somewhere. And what's interesting is that there's a fourth person who happens to overhear this conversation. By the way, if you've only ever heard of one story of Rashbi, it's probably this or some version of this or some piece of this. This is the cave story. This is the story that gets told on Lag BaOmer as part of Rashbi's legend and legacy and lore. But it's such a neat story. We won't do it justice tonight, but we'll get a decent sense of what's going on here. And I think with some of the themes we've brought up earlier, it'll actually we can actually take it somewhere too. So how about if I'm going to recommend that everybody read this one just to yourself? We'll pause the recorder here. All right. So Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon were sitting. Again, we don't know where they were sitting, but it's probably not the Beit Midrash, because what do we know about the details surrounding them?
Are they not at the same time?
The Romans are close.
Well, not the Romans, but there's this one guy in particular. I put his name in italics. Yehuda ben Gerim is sitting near them. Anybody notice anything about his name?
Yeah, strangers.
Okay, so he's not a rabbi, right? And B, ben Gerim means he's the son of
Yeah.
strangers,
A
or possibly
stranger,
even
yeah.
converts.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Right? A ger is a stranger, a convert, and so it's fascinating that the part of his name that they kept is this Ben Gerim. This could highlight for us how much we don't trust outsiders, especially in a story about Rashbi where he was the ultimate outsider. Even he is still considered on the inside of the rabbinic circles. Last time, remember, we talked about like the time of the Romans, how you couldn't eat at certain places with certain people. We had the party. Did we do that here? I think we did that. Bar Kokhba, or Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, talk about the two of them. Yeah, so we did that here, right? That. So anyway, the idea that we had to be careful about who was nearby as we were talking, because maybe they'd go and inform the government. Well, lo and behold, that's what's going to happen here. Rabbi Yehuda, by the way, ends up getting a nickname out of this story, that he's always called the first speaker, or the primary speaker, because look at how well he speaks. All right. So who's gonna do this for us? Let's go through the whole story here. Go ahead, Jeff. You're up
Rabbi
again.
Yehuda commenced the discussion by observing how fine are the works of the Romans. They have made streets, they have built bridges, they have erected bathhouses.
All right, pause. So what are the three things that he compliments the Romans on doing?
Material things.
Okay, very much material things. Streets. What does streets allow us to do?
Move around.
Okay, right there, but
Commerce.
get us from one place. That's commerce, absolutely. Number two, they've built bridges, right, which is really just aesthetic things, because you use a boat to get across the river, let's be honest, right? But the bridge is going to be more, it looks pretty, it looks
quicker.
nice. Maybe it's a little quicker, although,
Yeah.
depending, right? And then what's the third one? And then bathhouses,
Bathhouses.
which is like the epitome of self-indulgence. Yeah, as aesthetic. What's the word? Hedonism. Right. Right. That's the. It's really just this place, and also probably bathhouses were not the most PG of places.
Yes.
Right. We can assume that there might be
Things
other
were going
connotations
on.
that go on with that. Right, but even so, he's willing to give the praises to Rome, and Rabbi Yossi stays silent. Probably that means he didn't agree, right? But he doesn't go as extreme as our hero of the day, Shimon Bar Yochai, who answers and says, "Go ahead, Jeff."
All that they made for themselves. They built marketplaces to set harlots in them, baths to rejuvenate themselves, bridges to levy tolls for them.
Okay, right, and so he right away says, "Hey guys, all of these wonderful pleasures that you're talking about are actually, right? They're not pleasures for us." Right? We don't get to live in that world. It's all for them. They put, why a bridge? Because it's another way for them to collect tolls from us. Okay? All of these very, very material, mundane, uses. There's no long-term pleasure from a bridge, Right? There's no long-term pressure from a bathhouse, especially in a society where you didn't wear shoes. Right? Like the second you leave the bathhouse, you've now undone any good that could have possibly come out of that place. Right? And even the roads and the market, right? The roads, you don't ever get to the market because you get distracted by all of the immediate pleasures that are on the way, on the roadways. Right? So I think that the first thing that we should notice is not only does he critique the Romans, but the types of critiques that he's given are, just like Bob said, all of these material, temporal uses, right? So Jeff, give us the end of the story here.
Now Yehuda ben Gerim went and related their talk, which reached the government. They decreed, Yehuda, who exalted us, shall be exalted.
Right, and Yehuda ben Eli actually becomes a chief minister, right, who ends up reporting to the government, and he gets wealth from them and reports back in here. So he's very much exalted and promoted, maybe is a better word.
Which Yehuda?
Yehuda, the one who said good things about us.
Oh.
Let's give him a job. Right, that's what they gave him a job. They gave him money, and he becomes
Rabbi
Yehuda.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yossi, who was silent, shall be exiled to Tzipori.
And do you guys know about Tzipori at all? Have you heard this name? So just the one sentence that makes sense is it was probably the best example of a mixed town. So in Israel there were Jewish neighborhoods, Roman neighborhoods, and Tzipori, right, which was made famous for its integration and its assimilation of both cultures. So you'd see mosaics which have the Roman gods on the ground in the shul. Right, so very much an amalgam of two separate worlds.
Is it in the Galilee?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's it's a beautiful place, the architecture that's there, but you can definitely see how these two cultures started to mix a little bit, and so Rabbi Yossi, who says nothing, like, okay, you're not sure how you feel? Well, then you're going to be stuck in this middle ambivalence where you have to live both realities because you're unwilling to decide on one or the other.
And these were decrees from the Romans?
Yeah, they exiled him to that place, right? This is the right place for you.
Right.
Go there until you like us a little bit more to speak up, right?
Shimon, who rebuked, let him be executed. He and his son went and hid themselves in the Beit Midrash.
Okay, hold on a second.
Oh.
Can we just laugh for a minute here, right? If you're exiled, if you're sentenced from the Romans, right, and you're a rabbi, where's the first place that they would think to look for you? Right? Like, does that not strike anybody?
Yeah.
Unless
he sucked his son along with him.
So he took his son along with him, right? Because he and his son were the two who inherited the world to come, right? But who's the one person who could hide in the Beit Midrash? Right? Who could actually be considered as hiding in the Beit Midrash? Because it doesn't say they went to the Beit, it says they hid there.
Yeah,
right?
because he doesn't show up in the Beit Midrash anyway.
Exactly. Right? It's kind of like if you hide right under their noses, the best place.
In plain sight.
Right? Hide in plain sight.
Yeah.
They would never expect to find Rashbi in the Beit Midrash, so it's the perfect place for him to hide. Right. Let's appreciate the beauty of that, how well that's crafted into the story here, because it also highlights what an outsider he was. Nobody would ever think to look for him in the Beit Midrash.
The Romans wouldn't expect?
No, because they knew who was in the Beit
they
Midrash.
knew?
Yeah, sure. They
Oh,
probably
okay.
paid a toll or a tax to get in or something, so they knew who the main teachers were. Because they would have them be the governors, right? And so they would have to report back. Oh, what's going on? Oh, it's just, Akiva's just talking today again. Okay. I mean, they kept tabs on what was going on, right? So let's hide Rashbi in the Beit Midrash. I'm sorry, I just think that line is just great. So, okay, keep going.
They hid themselves in Beit Midrash while his wife brought him bread and a mug of water, and they dined. When the decree became more severe, he said to his son, "Women's minds are light."
Do you guys remember that line from last week?
Yeah.
That was what was said and what Bruria tried to disprove, potentially, right?
She may
So
be,
this is clearly a thought in rabbinic culture, right? It's not just one guy's opinion. Go ahead.
she may be put to the torture and expose us. So they went and hid in a cave.
Okay. And so now we get this cave. This is not like Plato's cave, right? This is, although there might be some parallels here. I only just thought of that recently. But what goes on in the cave is when the story takes this huge turn, and now we get to see the essence of Rashbi actually coming out. right? Paul, you want to do it for us?
Sure. A miracle occurred, and a carob tree and a water well were created for them. They would strip their garments and sit up to their necks in sand. The whole day they studied. When it was time for prayers, they robed, covered themselves, prayed, and then took off their garments again, so that they should not wear out. Thus they dwelt 12 years in the cave. Then Elijah came and stood at the entrance to the cave and exclaimed, "Who will inform the son of Yochai that the emperor is dead and his decree is annulled?"
All right. Anything we got to take out of there?
Well, they would not have known that the emperor's decree was gone if Elijah hadn't come. But I thought that it's sort of
Well, can we just
The-
highlight
in
that
the
for a second?
sand is-
Hold on. Can we just highlight that for a second? What you just said? Who just came to the cave here?
Elijah.
Okay, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Huge deal.
Elijah doesn't appear in stories unless he's absolutely needed.
Right.
Okay, right?
Right.
But it also lets us know what world are we dealing with here,
Yeah.
right? This is the world that Elijah visits.
A world where a carob tree and a water well will
Right.
appear.
Well,
Miracle.
how long does it take for a carob tree to grow? Roughly, generally,
7 years.
70 years. Okay, this is the
How do we know that? That's from another
That's
story.
the
isn't
story,
it?
yeah.
The circle guy?
planting
yeah.
story.
yeah nice. Look at that.
Ah, the circle guy.
Isn't that so cool? Like, hey, we're learning stuff, right?
All right, yeah.
Well, it's neat to be able to make the
Yeah.
associations. Right, so I think already the fact that it says a miracle occurred, right, is letting us know that we're now entering a different realm. Rashbi has left the rest of society, right? He hid in this cave. Who are the only people in this cave?
Him and his son.
Him and his son, right? And now that it's just the two of them, they're not hindered by any what we might call realities anymore, and they get to live their own reality, which is full of miracles.
But I also think that the image of them being covered up to here with it's like they're talking heads. I mean,
That's right.
Their bodies don't even exist.
Beautiful. Oh,
like that.
No
fantastic.
bodily functions.
Okay.
No.
Like that. It's good.
They're just. I mean, it's surreal, actually.
You know what else? Whereas before he wasn't breaking his studies to recite
Right.
Shema. Now they make a
Now he
big
does.
deal out of coming out of their sandpit to
pray.
To pray.
Right. So the first thing we have to notice here is this world of miracles, but even no physical. Also, look what they're eating.
Carob and water.
Carobs and water. Like, if you had to pick one of like the worst foods to be nourished on, right? Like, carob would be like worlds beyond anything else, right? Like I
Maybe
don't
they
know.
had carob brownies.
Maybe, or you know what I might say? I said if you had to think of the best foods to be nourished on, carob would be number 2. First would be everything else, right? Like, that's the way you can think of it. There's no. It's not even pleasant to eat. It's like, it's just like, all right, I guess I need nutrients. So like,
But then again, that's another thing about
They're
not
out
being
of
in this
body.
world.
Okay,
You know,
right.
we don't need to be in this world. We
Right,
don't have to have the enjoyment of
no,
food.
No physical embodiment.
I'm
no
surprised
pun
they
intended,
need water.
right? No embodiment. I don't know. Okay, but right, they don't know food. They need water because they have to exist, right?
And water's like
Well,
Torah.
wa-
And water is like
Right,
Torah,
right.
right? So they have this constant stream of Torah
Right.
flowing now, right? It's
Does
beautiful.
the carob have some associations?
Carob, there are a bunch of associations with it. It's often connected to like a sense of modesty, humility, right? Because there's no flavor, no taste, which I guess is the same thing that I just said twice. Right, but there,
If you had 2 mouths, you would know that.
right? If you had 2 mouths, then you get right.
Well, he was
So,
impressed, Rabbi, Rashbi was impressed by this guy that was carrying myrtle. Which
well,
is,
we'll get there. We'll get there because
Oh,
it's
which has
not
no
not
taste
at
in it.
first. Not at first, right? We gotta do the story in order here because there is a lesson that gets learned. Right, so we've got the water, and it's going there. They bear it up to their necks, right? But they do have, right? I'm not going to put it as. Hold on. First,
They're
we'll do-
praying heads, studying heads,
so
not
miracle,
talking.
no physical, but they do pray.
Yeah.
Right, so we've now divided up. So there still is a little piece of this we're not 100%. Maybe what they're praying for is because they did the wrong thing, right? Like maybe there's some sort of, or maybe there's this prayer of trying to get. I don't know what the prayer is. It makes no sense.
Whatever
It's
it is,
out
they
of
make
character.
They make a big deal out of covering their bodies. It's their snooze. So
Yeah.
they're admitting that they have, physical presence that they're covering to pray.
Right. So maybe they recognize there's some sort of recognition of we do have physical shortcomings a little bit.
Or
Yeah?
when you were saying, they have 1 foot in one world, they're buried, partly buried,
Mhm.
like you would, like a person who's gone on.
Right. Oh. Whoa. Yeah. Neat. Cool.
So
Meaning, like, for the most part, they've essentially transcended to this other world, except for put on the clothes to
Three
pray.
times
That's
a
like
day.
the one thing they do in this world
Okay.
is prayer. Maybe. Cool. All right. So now they come out of the. Okay, good. They come out of the cave, and Bob, you want to do this?
They emerged and saw a man plowing and sowing. They exclaimed, "They forsake eternal life and engage in temporal life."
Okay, right. And remember that source we saw earlier? What was the perfect example of worldly occupation as given by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's counterpart, Rabbi Ishmael? Was harvesting grain. And so what do they come out of the cave right away? And they see a guy farming.
and they criticize.
And they criticize, what are you doing? Farming! Like, what have we been doing for the last, how long?
Right.
How long?
12
years.
12 years,
12
right?
years.
Imagine that. 12 years of nothing but Torah study, right? And they come out and the first thing they see is a guy harvesting his grain. Like, we just existed on nothing but carob and water for 12 years. You can do that. Why are you making grain here? Why are you sowing and plowing? Like, how dare you waste your time with this? What should you be doing? Studying Torah, right? This is exactly the same Rashbi who went into the cave is the same Rashbi who comes out of the cave, right? For 12 years, nothing. No change whatsoever. And then, now this is where it starts to get really cool. Go ahead, Bob.
Whatever they cast their eyes upon was immediately burnt up. Thereupon a heavenly voice came forth and cried out, "Have you emerged to destroy my world? Return to your cave." So they returned and stayed for 12 months, saying,
Okay.
So
Let's go to they return.
Okay.
So the first thing, they come out, right? They've got this miracles, no physical embodiment. There is a little bit of prayer. And what do? They see the fields and they right? They start burning the fields with their eyes.
are they doing with intention, or is it?
Oh, it seems to be.
So they're doing it intentively, maliciously and intentively.
Certainly seems to be, right?
Okay. I wasn't
Because
sure.
the
I
comment
can't-
from the heavenly voice is, "What are you doing? Destroying my world?"
So with their miraculous
Oh, yeah.
power and energy, they are doing this with intention.
Well, and then the other thing is, Rashbi
So I
is
didn't get that
notorious
100%.
for being the one who talks about intention.
Okay.
In all of his, like especially with the Shabbat discussions, which I didn't bring in here, he's the one who says, so there's a discussion about like dragging a bench. Could you drag a bench across the dirt? The fear is it might be making a groove, right? Which would be like digging. And Rashbi says, no, if you're dragging a bench, it's because you want to sit on the bench and you want to be in the shade, not like in the sun. So intention has to do with it. And so he's all about, there's like books and books and books written about Rashbi's discussions on intention. So I think that we can assume that he, not only does he not see the world on this linear, literal or lateral level, but he also looks at the intention, the deeper, right, insinuations that can be made from things. Yeah, I absolutely think that this is intentional. Right, so now then they say, all right, go back to your cave, and they decide that their punishment was how long?
12 months.
Year.
12 months,
12 months.
right? And so therefore they have officially declared themselves,
Free.
Geonim.
well, Rashbi says, Gehinom.
wicked.
I mean, they were wicked people.
Right, so he declares himself, he's like, we can't be any worse than the wicked in Gehinom. So he full on accepts this punishment, it seems to be.
Because why? Because God came to them and said, "What are you doing, destroying my world?"
It seems to be, right? And then, now a heavenly voice comes out and says, okay, fine, leave your cave.
After 12 months? Or
After 12 months, right, which is a year. So now how long have they fully been in the cave?
13.
Now 13 years. So that's why you said, well, after 12 years he learned no lesson. I said maybe it was a 13-year lesson. right? It seems to be Rashbi now understands the world a little bit differently. 13 is like bar mitzvah. Like we definitely have to.
Responsibility.
There's something 13 around. Like there's some number there. Divine attributes. We said before.
Divine attributes.
So I want to do numbers. I want to like study the numbers of the Talmud. I think it's so cool. But Bob, go ahead and now tell us. Now look at the juxtaposition between the two, the father and the son. First, the son. Whenever
Rabbi Eliezer wounded.
Where?
Mm-hmm. Last line on the page.
Yeah, Rabbi Shimon healed.
Okay.
He said, "My son, you and I are sufficient for the world."
Okay. So
Can you
now,
explain that? What does that mean?
So, Elazar comes out, and he, after his 1 year of punishment, does not change at all. He still sees fields and farmers, and he looks upon them, and he burns them. And Rabbi Shimon looks at those fields, at those farmers, and with his gaze, he heals them.
Where did Rabbi Elazar come from?
It's his son.
That's his son.
Oh, that's his son. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So wounded,
Okay.
he.
Okay, sorry, yes.
Wherever.
So if he has a problem, Rabbi Shimon fixes it.
So now that so they walk out of the cave, and Elazar learned nothing.
Oh, he was still
Right?
wounded.
He was still in this,
wounded. Okay.
in this eternal world.
How do we know that he? It says wherever he wounded.
Yeah. Wherever he looked upon with his eyes, like he would burn more fields, right? Because that's what happened the last time they came out of the cave. They were looking at stuff and burning fields, right? And so wherever he looked, then he would, and Rashbi would say, no, my son, Dai le'olam ani ve'ata. It's enough in the world that just you and I are here. We don't need to hold everybody else to that standard. Right? And then now I think you see Rashbi learning his lesson that, hey, what we've done here is something special, but this is not for everybody else. Right? We're going to be the ones who go on to the next world. We're going to be the ones who get to ask for miracles, and miracles will happen. Right?
So what happens to Rabbi Elazar? Just to skip to the 6 books ahead.
Yeah.
What happens? What's the end of Rabbi Elazar? What's his reward?
I don't know. I'd have to study more. I mean, he gets quoted and stuff. He's around still. Yeah. Elazar Rabbi Shimon, like he's around. I'd have to study him more. I just don't know. Bob, you ask such
Come
good
back and
questions.
teach
Like
again.
yeah, right.
You and I are sufficient for the world.
Right. It's enough that the world has the two of us here.
Okay.
It doesn't need to have everybody being a Torah scholar.
Okay.
Our Torah will officially save the world. Right? Maybe you heard this thought, right? That there's like entire groups of people who say we're currently saving the world by studying Torah. Right? They get this from this idea here. That
The
Rashbi
other side of
views.
it is people say if there's no Torah, the world immediately is destroyed.
Yeah. So there's many other sources, but like a lot of it is coming from the fact that look at what Rashbi's doing here, right? He says it's enough that the Torah that we have alone, just the two of us, can save the world. Okay, it's enough to make the world exist. We don't have to worry about chastising those who aren't studying Torah. We don't have to worry anymore, right? All of these other things. If somebody is an unlearned person, even if they're pious or holy, all right, let them be. Okay, that doesn't matter because they don't apply to us anymore, right? We're here. That's enough. Okay? Stop burning things. And then where the story really comes to conclusion. Go ahead, Bob. On the eve of Sabbath.
On the eve of the Sabbath, before sunset, they saw an old man holding 2 bundles of myrtle and running at twilight. "What are these for?" they asked him. "They are in honor of the Sabbath," he replied. "One is for remember and one for protect." Said he,
Shamor and Zachor, like we talked about before in Chavruta.
Said he to his son, "See how precious are the commandments to Israel." Thereat their minds were calmed.
Okay, so what is it that finally calms Rabbi Elazar? Is he needs to see an example of some no name, right? Just a guy,
Carrying
no
nothing.
rabbi, carrying. And by the way, myrtle is the one that has no taste and no smell. And according to Midrash, we link the taste to Torah study, and we link the smell to good deeds. So if each of the 4 parts of the lulav and the etrog and the hadas na'arava, each one has either smell and no taste, or taste and no smell, or both smell and taste, or neither smell and taste, right? And so they're related to the 4 different types of Jews, right? The Jews who learn Torah but don't have good deeds, the Jews who learn Torah and have good deeds, the ones who have good deeds but don't learn Torah, and then finally this last one which doesn't learn Torah and doesn't have good deeds, and even that guy still observes Shabbat, right? He still has a myrtle for Shamor and a myrtle for Zachor. Okay. Then this next one we can just sort of skip over, right? Because it's this whole Pinchas ben Yair starts to hear. He says, "Oh, he's back out. I'm going to go meet him. Let me clean you." And as he's cleaning again, Pinchas ben Yair looks at the surface, right? And what does he notice about Rashbi's surface?
Clean.
Right? It's all like, it's rough, right? There's been sand rubbing up against it for 13 years. He's got calluses and everything, yeah? And he says, "Oh, I'm so sad to see you like this." And Rashbi says, "No. Don't look at the surface, look underneath." Because maybe at the surface it looks like callous and bad, but why is the reason that I got like this? Because I got to study Torah for 13 years straight, right? With no distractions, right? It was amazing. And then we have this other line. So originally Shimon Bar Yochai would ask a question, Pinchas ben Yair would give him 13 answers, but now Pinchas ben Yair asks a question, and Shimon Bar Yochai gives him 24 answers. And 24 seems to be our number that's like perfect understanding or top understanding, something like that. Then Rashbi moves forward. "Such a miracle has occurred to me. Let me go and remedy something for the community." Notice how what Rashbi's thinking is, now that a miracle happened for me, I might have lost part of my share in this next world. Right? Like my miracle juice is running out. So what do I have to do now? I got to go make it up somehow. I better do something nice for the community. Right? So he goes through, is there something that needs improving? Well, there's this place of doubtful uncleanliness, and it's difficult for Kohanim to go around all the time. Right? So there's some sort of grave or something that's like been hidden over by some dirt. So he says, does anybody know if there's any place here there could have been something tahor considered so the Kohanim could walk? This old guy says, Yochanan ben Zakkai used to cut down lupines of truma, some little like seeds or something. Truma can only be taken in a state of cleanliness, right? In a state of tahara. So it must be that where these things were was places of tahara. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai scatters the lupines around, and then all of a sudden the grave emerges. And so there he says, look, anywhere where it's hard ground, that's tahor, that's clean. And any ground where it's soft, that's tameh, that's where the grave is, right? So you can't walk there. And so now the Kohanim know there's like nice little signs guiding you, right? White lights lead to red lights, lead to tahara, right? They lead to clean paths so the Kohanim can go. Now they can walk straight as opposed to having to go around the entire field. All right, Kathy, you want to give us the conclusion here? Said the certain old man, the son of Yochai has purified a cemetery. Oh no, how dare you, Rashbi, you just purified a cemetery. People aren't going to take you seriously now. Right? There was a dead body here and you just said it's okay to walk past it. Now Rashbi gets furious with this. Said, had you not been with us, even if you have been with us but did not vote, you might have said, well, but now that you were with us and voted with us, it will be said, even whores braid each other's hair. How much more should we expect this from Torah scholars? Okay, so what happened? Notice how there was this certain old man who pointed out that there were certain areas that could be pure. And then later on, after Rashbi purifies the place, the old man says, oh, you purified a cemetery. It's like a snarky remark. Like, oh, look at this guy. He's so good. He just made a cemetery tahor, which a cemetery is like the definition of what can't be tahor. Mm-hmm. And Rashbi chastises him and says, you can't argue with me publicly like that. You're the reason that we put this here, right? And then the analogy that he gives is just brilliant, right? Even whores braid each other's hair, right? Harlots, right? So they're at odds with each other, right? Like, if you take the client, then that means that the other one's not working tonight. I don't need to go any more into like how whores do their business, but like, right? The fact is that there are a certain number of clients and a certain number of whores, and any whore who gets taken, I'm sorry for using the word whore, like prostitutes, right? I'll use adult thing. I was reading what was here, right? So if there are a bunch of prostitutes, but even so, they still help each other out, right? They braid each other's hair. It's actually in this prostitute's best interest for that prostitute to look good. Right? It's better for business. The clients will pay more money for all of the prostitutes around, right? And it's just so funny that this is the example that Rashbi uses, because he's like, even prostitutes, the lowlife of the lowlife of the lowlife in his mind, are able to figure out how to get along with each other. Torah scholars should of course get each other's backs, right? How dare you now? Which is so funny because you might see him learning the lessons that he didn't, right? He got it wrong in the Beit Midrash the first time when he asked that question about causing the two Torah scholars to fight with each other, right? And then here, his whole journey and his whole conquest, his whole quest rather. So now he finally gets to the point. But what does he do? He casts his eye upon this guy and Kathy,
kills him.
and he dies. Right?
And he dies.
There is no place for you in this world. Right? You can't exist if you're going to go and argue like that to specifically undermine Torah. We're not talking about arguments for the sake of heaven. We're not talking about difficulties or conversations. You're just being a nudnik, right? Like, right? You're annoying. Now,
Then
go
he
ahead.
went out in the street and saw Yehuda ben Geri.
Oh, this guy.
That man is still in the world? He exclaimed. He cast his eye upon him, and he became a heap of bones.
All right, so again, he still hasn't lost his miracle powers, right? He casts his eye on him, and Yehuda ben Gerim turns into a pile of bones.
But now he feels that the world is a valid place to be in
Perhaps.
because he's going to take Yehuda ben Gerim out of it. He doesn't feel he deserves to be in it.
There you go, right? So we're seeing finally with Rashbi, he's coming back down to earth just a little bit.
Yeah, literally.
Right, but right, literally. But he still has this place of miracles as well,
Yeah.
right? So
Wow. Cool story.
it's cool, right?
Yeah, very.
Can we take it one step further?
Oh, yeah.
Because I want to be cautious of the conscious of the time.
You're gonna lock up.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. From whose perspective is the story told?
Ooh.
Right. We just assume that it's the Talmud telling the story, right? And I love the miracles in this story, and I think you can't read it without the miracles. But what if it's read from Rashbi's perspective?
Sure looks that way.
What if we get a third-person account of Rashbi's version of the story? Right? Now, look at how, because I always think you have to be able to look at the stories and like rationally understand, like, how do you not view the miracles? And I'm actually afraid to do that a little bit tonight because Rashbi is such a miracle man that I kind of don't want to take away from the mystique. But I feel like in the sake of honesty, right, it's worth it to say, what does it mean that he looks upon him and the guy dies? Right? Meaning, Rashbi has that, he's such an intense gaze.
Yeah.
Like, the way he sees this guy, he doesn't exist to me anymore. Right? Yehuda ben Gerim, he looks at him and he's nothing but a pile of bones. So if you want to read it mystically, magically, he literally kills the guy. If you want to read it metaphorically, right, so it's not a literal reading anymore, he sees him as no substance, right? Nothing in this world. And I just think that's I like to be honest about that because otherwise you start spreading these stories and it's like, really? He was looking at fields and burning them with his eyes? Well, what could that mean, right? Maybe it was his gaze was so fiery, right, that it was as if it was on fire. I don't think it takes away from the mystique at all because it keeps that intensity, which is what we're looking for.
Yeah, the only thing,
Yeah.
God just got finished telling him, don't burn up. You know, what you're doing is something I don't endorse.
But that was for no purpose, right? Both of these had proper intention behind them, right? That the idea here is this guy is no good. He's intentionally undermining rabbinic arguments, right? That's not going to help the world endure. This guy here, he was just a troublemaker, right? Yehuda ben Gerim, he had no investment in the Torah, in the advancement of Judaism or anything, right? So Rashbi
He was
says,
a snitch to the Romans.
snitch to the Romans. There's no reason, no place for him here, right? No place for him. We're here for Torah study.
But what about the other guy?
Which guy? The old man?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the old man. So I think the reason why Rashbi gets so angry with him is because he was the one who suggested this place is clean.
He set him up. Yeah.
Right? He set him up. Right? So he says, you lost your privilege. You don't get to be
What's
here
he talking
anymore.
about vote?
Meaning if part of the vote is a bad word, maybe discussion. Right? Had you not been part of the discussion here, had you not actually weighed in and said, hey, this place is okay, then what you say now is a valid argument. But since you were the one who came and said, go here, and now you're saying, ha ha, Rashbi's purifying a cemetery, right? With that like Muppet tone of voice too, right? That's what it had to be. Right? I mean, that's what it sounds like a little bit, right? So he says, no, forget it. Like you're not part of this rabbinic world. And so either he looks at him and dies, or he said, you're dead to me in that metaphorical
complete
sense. Right?
disregard.
Absolutely. And either one, I think, is a very valid reading in this case. So that's our guy, Rashbi,
Very
right?
interesting guy.
And if I could just take a sentence to sort of summarize all that we've done here over the last 4 weeks now, I think that the theme, right, so first off, the course called Who Are the People in Your Talmudic Neighborhood? I think that when we look at people, we start to get a real sense of who were these people, and it seems like every one of them was just trying to find their place. Right? Whether we started from the beginning with the discussion about innovation versus preservation, right? And we looked at the two extremes of that stance and how each of them was trying to identify where was their place. Eliezer ends up getting exiled at the end of his life. Elazar ben Arach ends up forgetting his Torah or possibly innovating so far to the point that it's unrecognizable. And then we are left with a tension. Right? There is a tension of how do we balance these two both crucial ideas? Well, we need a leader. So we look to our leader. Rabban Gamliel was an example. But what he's going to highlight for us is that the leader has to really be in touch with the people. And we're looking for that final compromise of 3 weeks and 1 week, right? That Rabban Gamliel is still our leader, but until he can learn about how the rest of the people need to be, right, we don't fully invest in him. Stemming from there is that we're going to have to find, so who is the leader leading? Well, that's the individuals, and there's going to be people who stand out. And last week we got to see Bruria, who was the ultimate standout. And we were left with the question, right? That's probably the toughest one, is that we were actually left with the question of what was her place? What do we do with her? And in the end, the answer might be we just don't know, but we can't end the conversation there. It means then we have to find a place, right? Until we get to a guy like Rashbi, who was on the extreme and who really was stuck between these two worlds, almost too far into this heavenly realm that what he's capable of and what he's learning about is so pure Torah that he almost has difficulty interacting in this main world for us. And I think that it's a good reminder for all of us as we start learning and growing and doing more into any discipline, right? Are we able to still have at least one solid foot in that other world as well, to be able to keep that balance, going back to that first week, of that innovation and preservation, or of that temporal and eternal, right? Or whatever the two tensions are going to be, right? How do we leave ourselves in that balance? And then when we do, and I think that's the real place where miracles start to occur, right? Is when we get to be truly ourselves and we get to find our place and identify who we are in our own personal neighborhood, as it were, to keep the metaphor. Then we start to see our life as being filled with miracles. And if we don't see the miracles around us, then may we all be fortunate enough to create our own miracles. So I think that's a nice thought going into Purim as we're about to lead into a holiday of miracles. Thank you all for our time together, and God willing, we'll be able to come back again sometime.
Definitely.
And do this again. So thank you.
Excellent
Has
course.
anybody ever thought that he was on